From the mud of the Somme to the streets of Basra, Britain has shaped tank warfare from its very first moment. This is the complete story. Over a century of British armored development. Era 1. The birth of the tank, 1915 to 1918. Little Willie, 1915. The world's first tank prototype, built by William Foster & Co. in Lincoln. Constructed on an unsuspended track frame with a non-rotating dummy turret, it needed a 6-man crew. Though never used in combat, Little Willie proved that a tracked armored fighting vehicle was mechanically feasible, directly leading to the Mark I. Mother, Big Willie, 1915. The true predecessor to all WWI British tanks, Mother was a lengthened rhomboidal prototype featuring sponson-mounted guns and a revolutionary track design that wrapped around the entire hull. Successfully crossing wide trenches and trials, it convinced military authorities to order mass production, spawning the entire Mark series. Mark I, 1916. The world's first tank to see combat, the Mark I entered battle on September 15, 1916, at Flers Courcelette, on the Somme. Built in male and female variants, its iconic rhomboidal shape was specifically engineered to cross wide trenches. Of the 49 deployed, only 25 moved forward at the start. Mark II, 1916. A minor refinement of the Mark I, primarily intended for crew training, the Mark II featured slightly modified sponsons and improved hatches. It was never considered combat-ready due to its thin armor and mechanical fragility, but it filled an urgent need to train thousands of new tank crews before the main production models arrived. Mark III, 1916. Another transitional training variant, the Mark III incorporated lessons from early Mark I combat operations. Small improvements were made to driver visibility and cooling, but it too was considered unsuitable for frontline service. Like the Mark II, the Mark III served almost exclusively in a training role and was never deployed in major offensives. Mark IV, 1917. The most produced and most combat-effective British tank of WW1, the Mark IV featured unditching beams, safer petrol storage, and improved Lewis gun sponsons. Over 1,200 were built. It fought at the pivotal Battle of Cambrai in November 1917, where nearly 400 tanks overran German lines in the first truly modern combined arms offensive. Mark V, 1918. A dramatic upgrade over its predecessors, the Mark V introduced a revolutionary Wilson epicyclic transmission, allowing a single driver to control steering without assistance. It also had a more powerful Ricardo engine and improved visibility. 400 were built, equally split between male and female variants, seeing extensive action in the 1918 offensives. Mark VI, 1917. The Mark VI was a proposed redesign of the rhomboidal heavy tank, with a completely overhauled hull for improved crew comfort and firepower. However, in 1917, the project was halted when the joint Anglo-American Mark VIII Liberty tank was prioritized, as it fulfilled the same requirements on a grander scale. Only a wooden mock-up was ever completed.
Mark VII, 1917. Developed as an improved Mark Funds with a lengthened hull and a revolutionary Williams-Janney hydraulic transmission, the Mark VII was intended to solve the exhausting steering problems of earlier tanks. Of an order for 75, only 3 were completed before the war ended, with a single vehicle dispatched to France for trials.
Mark VIII Liberty, 1918. A massive joint Anglo-American project, the 39-ton Mark VIII Liberty was designed for mass production by both nations. Its elongated rhomboidal hull could carry 11 crew and cross the widest German trenches. Completed too late for WW1, it equipped armored forces well into the 1920s and represented the pinnacle of the rhomboidal tank concept. Mark IX, 1918. Designed in 1917 as the world's first specialized armored personnel carrier, the Mark IX could carry 30 fully equipped infantry inside its armored hull. 34 were completed, but none saw service before the armistice. One prototype was experimentally converted into an amphibious tank, an early test of river-crossing armor doctrine. Medium Mark A Whippet, 1917. Designed to exploit breakthroughs created by heavy tanks, the nimble Whippet weighed just 14 tons and could reach 8 miles per hour, fast by WW1 standards. Armed with 4 machine guns in a fixed superstructure, 200 were built. During the August 1918 Battle of Amiens, Whippets caused mayhem among retreating German infantry. Medium Mark B, 1918. Designed by Lieutenant Walter Wilson, the Mark B was a substantially larger 18-ton medium tank, with a forward superstructure and rear engine. Bristling with 5 machine guns and many sponsons, it represented a major conceptual leap toward modern tank layout. None were delivered before the armistice, and only 50 completed units served briefly post-war. Medium Mark C Hornet, 1918. The final medium tank designed for WWI service. The Mark C Hornet was an improved 19-ton vehicle featuring a more powerful engine and better crew ergonomics. Considered the most effective British tank design of the war era, it was ordered in large numbers. The armistice halted full production, though a small number were built for post-war use. Flying Elephant, 1916. A radical 1916 proposal for a super-heavy tank weighing up to 100 tons. The Flying Elephant was designed to be completely immune to all known German artillery. Its immense size would have required 8 men to operate, and given it just 2 miles per hour of top speed. The project was abandoned as entirely impractical before a prototype was completed. Era 2. Interwar Experiments, 1919 to 1939. Medium Mark D, 1919. An ambitious post-war design by Major Philip Johnson. The Mark D used a snake track suspension, allowing unprecedented speeds of up to 20 miles per hour. Intended to revolutionize armored warfare, it proved mechanically unreliable and extremely difficult to steer. Despite extensive trials, it was abandoned, though its speed concept deeply influenced British interwar tank thinking. Vickers Medium Mark I, 1923. The first truly modern British tank. The Vickers Medium Mark I introduced a fully rotating turret on top of the hull, a revolutionary departure from WW1 rhomboidal designs. Armed with a 3-pounder gun, it became the backbone of the Royal Tank Corps in the mid-1920s, and stimulated the development of mobile armored doctrine. Vickers Medium Mark II, 1925. An improved version of the Medium Mark I, the Mark II featured a coaxial machine gun, better armor protection, and a more reliable engine. It became the standard British tank through the late 1920s and early 1930s, forming the basis for experiments with Little Hart and Fuller's revolutionary mobile warfare theories that would inspire Blitzkrieg. Vickers A1E1 Independent, 1925. A massive experimental heavy tank featuring 1 large main turret and 4 smaller subsidiary turrets. The A1E1 Independent was decades ahead of its time. Weighing 32 tons, only a single prototype was ever built. Though rejected for British service, its multi-turret concept directly inspired the Soviet T-28, T-35, and German Neubaufahrzeug. Carden Lloyd Tankette 1926. Conceived by Major Giffard Martel and developed by John Carden. This ultra-cheap 2-man tracked vehicle reduced armored mobility to its absolute essentials. The Mark VI variant became the most widely exported tank design in the world, with 16 nations purchasing or licensing it. It spawned the Soviet T-27, Italian CV-33, and German Panzer I. Maurice Martel Tankette 1926. Built in his own garage by Major Giffard Martel as a private experiment, the Maurice Martel was one of the earliest one-man tankette concepts. Using commercial Morris car components, it proved that an individual soldier could operate an armored vehicle. Although crude, it helped launch the entire tankette concept and Martel's influential career in armor. Light Tank Mark I 1930, developed by Carden Lloyd as the British Army's dedicated light reconnaissance tank. The Mark I was a small 2-man vehicle armed with a single Vickers machine gun. Only a handful were built, but it provided the essential mechanical and tactical template for the entire light tank series that would equip British forces into the early Second World War. Light Tank Mark II, 1930, an incremental improvement on the Mark I. The Light Tank Mark II used a more powerful Rolls-Royce engine and a refined turret design. It was the first model issued in sufficient numbers to properly equip armored units. Variants were deployed to India, where they saw active service suppressing tribal uprisings on the northwest frontier through the 1930s. Light Tank Mark III, 1932. The Mark III introduced Horseman coil spring suspension, a significant improvement over the leaf springs of earlier Marks. This gave much smoother cross-country performance. Although still armed only with a machine gun, it was a reliable and widely tested vehicle that refined the suspension system used throughout the entire pre-war British light tank family. Vickers 6-ton Mark E, 1928. The most influential export tank of the interwar era, the Vickers 6-ton was offered in twin-turret Type A and single-turret Type B configurations. Purchased by 13 nations, it was never adopted by the British Army itself. However, it directly spawned the Soviet T-26, Polish 7TP, and Italian M11 medium tanks, shipped in global armor development. Light Tank Mark IV, 1934. The Mark IV light tank tested a more powerful 90-horsepower Meadows engine and further refined the Horseman suspension, improving the ride quality and reliability of the light tank series. Exported variants were built for Belgium and the Dutch East Indies. Though it never saw British combat service, it was an important step toward the reliable Mark V and VI. Light Tank Mark V, 1935. The Mark V introduced a larger, two-man turret capable of mounting both a .50 caliber and a .303 caliber machine gun, a significant improvement in firepower. Faster and more mechanically refined than its predecessors, it served as the primary British light tank in Egypt and India during the late 1930s, gaining invaluable operational experience. Cruiser Mark I A9, 1936, Britain's first purpose-built cruiser tank. The A9 was designed to exploit breakthroughs at speed. It featured a Christie-influenced suspension and a 2-pounder gun, but its thin armor was quickly shown to be inadequate. Crucially, it introduced the concept of a sub-turret for the hull machine gun, a layout widely used on subsequent British cruisers. Cruiser Mark II A10, 1936, designed as a heavier infantry cruiser compromise, the A10 added extra armor bolted onto the A9 hull. This made it too slow for cavalry work, yet still too thin-skinned for direct infantry support. Over 170 were built and fought in France and North Africa, where their vulnerability to German anti-tank guns quickly became apparent. Matilda I A11, 1937, Britain's first infantry tank. The Matilda I was an incredibly slow, single-man vehicle with heavy frontal armor, but only a machine gun for armament. Designed to walk beside infantry at 8 miles per hour, it was already conceptually obsolete at birth. However, its thick armor made it nearly invulnerable to most weapons during the 1940 Battle of France. Light Tank Mark VI, 1936. The final and most produced of the pre-war British light tank series, the Mark VI featured a fully enclosed, two-man turret and various submarks with improved armament. Over 1,000 were built. Despite being the primary British tank at the outbreak of World War II, its thin armor and machine gun-only armament made it ineffective against German armor in France. Cruiser Mark III A13, 1937, a revolutionary leap in British tank design. The A13 incorporated Christie suspension, purchased directly from the American inventor, allowing speeds over 30 miles per hour. Armed with a 2-pounder gun, it established the high-speed cruiser tank concept that defined British armor philosophy for years. However, its thin armor remained a persistent and often fatal weakness. Cruiser Mark IV A13 Mark II, 1938, an improved A13 featuring additional armor on the turret and hull sides. The Cruiser Mark IV addressed the most glaring weakness of its predecessor. It served in France in 1940 and in the early North African campaigns. Despite improvements, it remained dangerously under-armored against German 50mm anti-tank guns, and crews suffered significant losses. Vickers Medium Mark III, 1928. The Medium Mark III was an ambitious export-focused development of the Mark II, featuring a completely redesigned hull with better sloped armor and an improved suspension. Prototype examples were sold to Japan and Ireland. While rejected for British service, it contributed important design data that influenced the development of the subsequent cruiser tank series. Mark VII Tetrek, 1937, a Vickers private venture light tank. The Tetrek used an unusual steering system where the front wheels could be bent to turn the vehicle. Lightweight at just 7.5 tons and armed with a 2-pounder gun, it was adopted as Britain's standard airborne tank. It saw its most notable action at the Rhine crossing in 1945, airlifted in Hamilcar gliders, Era 3. The Second World War, 1939 to 1945. Infantry tank Matilda II, A12, 1939. The definitive British infantry tank of the early war, the Matilda II was almost impervious to Italian and early German anti-tank guns. Its 2-pounder gun and thick armor dominated Operation Compass in North Africa in 1940-41. The arrival of the German 88mm flat gun, used in an anti-tank role, quickly negated its armor advantage. Cruiser Mark V Covenanter, A13 Mark III, 1940. Rushed into production to replace losses at Dunkirk, the Covenanter suffered from a fundamentally flawed cooling system that caused overheating in virtually all conditions. Despite over 1,700 being built, it never saw frontline combat and was used exclusively for training in Britain. It stands as one of the most expensive failures in British tank procurement history. TOG 1, 1940. Standing for the old gang, the TOG 1 was designed by WWI veterans who believed the next war would again feature wide trenches and deep mud. It was an enormous 81-ton rhomboidal monster with a 2-pounder turret. Completely obsolete by modern standards and incredibly slow, it never progressed beyond a single working prototype. Infantry tank Valentine, A10 Mark III, 1940. A compact, reliable infantry tank designed privately by Vickers. The Valentine was initially rejected, but accepted out of sheer desperation after Dunkirk. With over 8,000 built across 11 variants, it was the most produced British tank of the war. Widely exported to the Soviet Union, it proved a dependable battlefield workhorse despite its limited firepower. Taube 2, 1941. The successor to the Taube 1, the Taube 2 was even larger at 81 tons and featured a modified turret from the A-27 Cromwell chassis, housing a 17-pounder anti-tank gun. While it demonstrated that such a gun could be mounted in a British tank turret, the vehicle itself was completely unworkable for modern warfare and languished as a famous prototype. Cruiser Mark 6 Crusader, A-15, 1941. The most numerous British cruiser tank of the early war, the Crusader was fast, sleek, and mechanically plagued. Its Christie suspension gave it speed in the North African desert, but chronic engine and cooling failures left many stranded. Despite persistent teething troubles, upgraded Crusader 3s, carrying a 6-pounder gun, gave British crews a fighting chance against German armor. Infantry tank Churchill, A-22, 1941. Named for the Duke of Marlborough rather than the Prime Minister, the Churchill was a massive, heavily armored infantry tank carrying a crew of 5. After a disastrous debut at Dieppe, it proved its exceptional climbing ability in the Tunisian mountains. Produced in 11 marks, it served until the end of the war and was the last British infantry tank. A-30 Challenger, 1942, designed to give British armored units a mobile platform for the devastating 17-pounder anti-tank gun. The Challenger lengthened the Cromwell chassis and mounted a large new turret. Despite its excellent firepower, its tall profile and thin side armor made crews cautious. It was largely superseded by the Sherman Firefly conversion, but saw service in Northwest Europe. Cruiser Mark 7 Cavalier, A-24, 1942. An interim cruiser tank using the Nuffield Liberty engine from the Crusader, fitted to a new, larger hull, the Cavalier inherited all the engine reliability problems of its predecessor. Deemed unfit for frontline use almost immediately, all 500 were diverted to artillery observation and training roles. It represents the low point of wartime British tank development. Cruiser Mark 8 Centaur, A-27L, 1942. The Centaur used the same new Leyland hull as the Cromwell, but retained the unreliable Liberty engine, pending the availability of the Rolls-Royce Meteor. Like the Cavalier, most were unsuitable for frontline tank duty, but Centaur Mark IVs equipped with a 95mm howitzer served brilliantly as close support vehicles during the D-Day landings. Cruiser Mark 8 Cromwell, A-27M, 1943. When the Rolls-Royce Meteor V12 aero engine became available, it transformed the Centaur hull into the excellent Cromwell, fast, reliable, and maneuverable. Armed with a 75mm gun, it equipped British armored divisions in Normandy and became one of the better Allied tanks of the war. It finally delivered on the promise of the high-speed cruiser concept. A-33 Excelsior, 1943, designed to replace the Churchill as a heavy infantry assault tank. The Excelsior combined Cromwell running gear with heavy Churchill-style armor and a 75mm gun. Weighing over 40 tons, it proved mechanically unreliable and too heavy for standard military bridges. When the Churchill proved its worth in Tunisia in 1943, the Excelsior was promptly abandoned. Infantry tank Black Prince, A-43, 1944. An attempt to fit the formidable 17-pounder anti-tank gun into a Churchill hull. The Black Prince required a wider hull to accommodate the larger turret ring. Weighing over 50 tons and crawling at just 10 miles per hour, it was obsolete before its 6 prototypes were finished. The Centurion, arriving imminently, made it immediately redundant, ending the infantry tank lineage entirely. Infantry tank Valiant A-38, 1944. The Valiant was a heavily up-armored and up-gunned development of the Valentine chassis, intended as a cheap infantry assault tank. Armed with a 6-pounder, it was tested in 1944, but found to be overweight, underpowered, and no improvement over existing designs. The project was quietly cancelled, another casualty of the race to field adequate armor. Comet 1, A-34, 1944. The best British tank to see combat in WWW. The Comet was the culmination of the cruiser tank lineage. Its compact 77mm gun was as effective as the 17-pounder, while fitting into a well-protected turret on a reliable Cromwell chassis. Arriving in early 1945, it could engage Panthers on equal terms and directly inspired the legendary Centurion. Centurion A-41, 1945. Though delivered too late for WWW2 combat, the Centurion was arguably the first true main battle tank, combining the firepower of a heavy tank with the mobility of a cruiser. Its 17-pounder gun and well-sloped armor broke entirely from the infantry cruiser division. It went on to serve in Korea, Suez, Vietnam, and numerous other conflicts worldwide. A-39 Tortoise, 1945. The most extreme British armored vehicle of WW2. The 78-ton Taurus was a casemate assault gun with 228mm of frontal armor and a massive 32-pounder gun designed to crush the Siegfried Line. 6 pilot models were only delivered after Germany surrendered. Too heavy for almost every bridge and road in Europe, it remains one of the most fearsome prototypes never to see battle. Light tank Harry Hopkins, Mark 8, 1944. Named for U.S. President Roosevelt's envoy, the Harry Hopkins was a Vickers development of the Tetrarch, with improved armor and a better engine. Produced from 1944, its 100 units arrived too late for widespread service. Intended as a successor airborne tank, it was superseded before entering active combat, but equipped various training and colonial units post-war. Era 4, Cold War Steel, 1945 to 1990, FV-201 Universal Tank, A-45. Conceived as a single, universal chassis that could serve as tank, APC, and engineering vehicle, the FV-201 was an ambitious post-war concept. Its powerful 17-pounder and later 20-pounder guns were impressive, but the project grew too heavy and complex. It was eventually cancelled, though its chassis work laid foundations for the Conqueror heavy tank program. Centurion Mark III, 1948. The Centurion Mark III introduced the powerful 20-pounder, 84mm gun, and a fully stabilized gun control system, allowing it to fire accurately while moving. This variant proved devastating during the Korean War, where it outclassed Soviet-built T-34-85s. Its combat success cemented the Centurion's reputation as one of the finest tanks ever built. FV-221 Caernarvon, 1952. An interim development placing the Conqueror turret on a Centurion hull for testing purposes, the Caernarvon allowed trialing of the 120mm heavy tank gun system before the full Conqueror entered service. Only a handful were built, but they were crucial in refining the Conqueror's fire control system and resolving its early turret traversal problems. FV-214 Conqueror, 1955, Britain's last dedicated heavy tank, the 65-ton Conqueror, was designed specifically to destroy Soviet IS-3 heavies at extreme range. Its massive 120mm L1 gun was the most powerful tank weapon in NATO service. Issued in small numbers alongside Centurions in West Germany, it became obsolete almost overnight when the upgraded 105mm Centurion matched its ballistic performance. Centurion Mark V, 1956. Continuing the iterative refinement of the Centurion line, the Mk5 improved hull armor and introduced the Browning coaxial machine gun. It served extensively across the world, with over 20 nations operating the type. Israeli Centurions in this configuration, nicknamed Shot, proved particularly formidable in the 1967 Six-Day War and 1973 Yom Kippur War. FV-422, 1956. Officially dubbed the 40-ton Centurion, the FV-4202 was a Leyland Motors technology demonstrator, testing the reclined driver position and mantletless turret that would define the Chieftain. 3 were built and subjected to intensive trials. Although never a production vehicle, every key feature it validated became standard on the Chieftain main battle tank that followed. Centurion Mark X, 1959. The Centurion Mark X fitted the revolutionary British-designed 105mm L7 rifled gun, a weapon so effective it was adopted by West Germany, the United States, Israel, and Japan for their own tanks. This upgrade gave the aging Centurion a new lease of life, and demonstrated that a well-designed gun could remain relevant for decades, with proper ammunition development. FV-101 Scorpion CVRT 1969. The Combat Vehicle Reconnaissance Tracked Scorpion was an ultra-lightweight, air-portable tank weighing just 8 tons. Armed with a 76mm gun and powered by a Jaguar XK engine, it could reach 80 miles per hour, one of the fastest tanks ever built. It served with the SAS in the Falklands and saw widespread global export, remaining in service with many armies into the 21st century. FV-107 Scimitar CVRT, 1971. A variant of the Scorpion, substituting a 30mm Rarden cannon for the 76mm gun, the Scimitar was optimized for reconnaissance and light anti-armor work. Its high-velocity cannon could defeat light armored vehicles and proved highly effective in the Falklands War. The scimitar remained in British Army service for over 5 decades, outlasting far heavier designs. FV 4201 Chieftain, 1966. When introduced, the Chieftain was the most heavily armored and most powerfully gunned main battle tank in the world. Its 120mm L11A5 rifled gun with bagged charge ammunition became the NATO standard caliber. Despite excellent firepower and protection, its infamously unreliable Leyland L60 multi-fuel engine gave it a deserved reputation for chronic breakdowns in the field. Vickers MBT Mark I, 1963, a private venture export tank by Vickers Armstrongs using proven Centurion components, the L7 105mm gun and L60 engine in a new, lighter package. Designed to be affordable and easy to maintain, it was purchased by India and Kuwait. Indian licensed production, as the Vijayanta equipped the Indian Army for decades, seen combat in the 1971 Bangladesh War. Chieftain Mark V, Share 2, FV 4033, 1977, an extensively upgraded Chieftain developed for the Imperial Iranian Order. The Share 2 added Chobham composite armor, one of its first applications on a British tank. When Iran's Islamic Revolution cancelled the order, Britain inherited the design and developed it into the Challenger. The Share 2 thus became the direct technical ancestor of all Challenger variants. FV 4030-4, Challenger 1, 1983. Entering service in 1983 as the Chieftain's replacement, the Challenger 1 combined the first-generation Chobham composite armor with the proven 120mm L11A5 rifled gun. Its hydro-pneumatic suspension provided outstanding cross-country performance. It proved its worth decisively in the 1991 Gulf War, destroying over 300 Iraqi tanks without a single Challenger lost to enemy fire. MBT-80, 1980. The MBT-80 was an ambitious British program to develop a completely new generation main battle tank with advanced composite armor, a new gun, and modern fire controls. Rising costs, competing design philosophies, and the availability of the adapted Share 2 design led Parliament to cancel it entirely, redirecting investment toward what became the Challenger 1. Era 5. Modern armor and the future. 1990 to present. FV 4034 Challenger 2, 1998. Entering service in 1998, the Challenger 2 is one of the most protected tanks ever built. Its second-generation Chobham, Dorchester armor has never been penetrated by an enemy round. Armed with the 120mm L30A1 rifled gun and featuring exceptional fire control, it served in Bosnia, Kosovo, and Iraq, where it proved nearly invulnerable. Challenger 2 TES Megatron, 2006. The Theater Entry Standard Megatron upgrade applied an extensive additional armor package to Challenger 2s deployed to Iraq, including bar armor against RPGs, extra composite panels, and additional belly protection against IEDs. It dramatically increased survivability in urban warfare, transforming the already formidable Challenger 2 into an urban combat specialist. Challenger 2 Black Knight 2019, a technology demonstrator developed by BAE Systems. The Black Knight package added an active protection system to automatically detect and defeat incoming anti-tank missiles, plus thermal imaging cameras, laser warning systems, and regenerative braking. Though not yet formally ordered, it represents the likely technology path for Challenger 2's long-term life extension. Challenger 2 LEP, Challenger 3, 2021, under £800 million contract awarded in 2021 to Rheinmetall BAE Systems Land. 148 Challenger 2s are being converted to Challenger 3 standard. The upgrade replaces the rifled L30 gun with Rheinmetall's 120mm L55A1 smoothbore for full NATO ammunition compatibility, adds a completely new digital turret, and installs advanced hunter-killer sights. Initial operating capability is expected in 2027.